This is Technically Legal, podcast about legal technology, innovation in the legal industry, and the impact tech is having on the law. I'm Chad Main, the founder of legal services company Percipient, and on today's show, I'm having a talk with Ben Chiriboga. He's the Chief Growth Officer for legal CRM company Nexl. He's also the host of This Legal Life podcast. He was a lawyer, a litigator working on a big case. He was billing hours, grinding away, and he was starting to feel the constraints of his career. Then something happened, and it kind of changed the way he looked at law and his career in general. This happened when my guest today, Ben Chiriboga, was exposed to his first piece of legal tech, specifically an early e-discovery tool that used natural language processing. What he figured out is in just a few hours, it did what he had been struggling to do for 6 months. And in that moment, he had an epiphany. He saw the future of legal technology, and he wanted to be a part of it. But as Ben and I discussed today, and a lot of us know, the legal world, it's indifferent. It's a world of tradition. Historically, it's been a world that measures success in billable hours, not in efficiency. But Ben saw a new path, a new role for technology and legal, and he saw something beyond rote tasks and something bigger. Fast forward to 2025, and Ben is the Chief Growth Officer of Nexl. It's a legal CRM. That's Customer Relationship Management. He's helping to build a company that's changing how lawyers work. As he's going to tell us, it's not about replacing humans with AI, but about them using tech to give them superpowers. It's about building a better relationship and a deeper connection with clients. So how do you do it? How do you go from being a lawyer to legal tech? What's the secret to building a successful legal tech company? And what's the one thing AI cannot take away from a human? Stay tuned because Ben's going to fill us in.
I'm 30 years old. I'm a senior associate litigation, and we're trying this big case, like bigger than normal that we were doing. And for just a twist of fate, we end up getting this like e-discovery vendor and that has some early natural language processing basically in it. And I hadn't run across any of this in my practice and like working at the firm. Just basic technology stack at that point in time.
What year is this?
So this is like 2015, 2016. So right now in legal tech, generally what's going on at this point in time, it's contract, CLM, practice, management, kind of Clio sort of getting to its next stage, and a little bit of this like NLP kind of thing, especially in e-discovery and a little bit in sort of contract management. So people who have heard my story know that, at 30, I sort of realized I don't think I'm going to make it as a lawyer. There's parts of it which I really love, but parts of it which I feel is incredibly limiting, especially from the creativity and sort of the growth idea of it, to put a very fine point on it. And so I run into this tech and I'm like, I feel like I'm having like a road to Damascus, like fall off my horse moment where I say, this is incredibly powerful. You know what I mean? And then more than anything, I realize I'm the only one in the firm who is kind of like awestruck by this a little bit, And I'm like, why am I the only one that seems to be like really paying attention to this? But my grandfather was a successful entrepreneur in South America. And basically what I learned from him is be first into something. The way that I always tell it is like, he told me, you want to succeed in business, be the smartest, work the hardest, or like be first into something. And I just like heard his voice and I was like, I'm the only one that seems to be paying attention to the way that technology and sort of the practice are intersecting. And I had like such an aha moment because I'm like doing this discovery and I'm doing it for 6 months and this thing comes in.
What kind of case was it?
It was like a product liability case and comes in and does in like 6 hours what I hadn't been able to do in like 6 months, And I was like, oh my God, it's so crazy, the stark difference. So long story short, I moved up to New York and I tried to ride this legal tech wave. And in New York, this is kind of like what's happening right at this point in time.
Why New York? Why didn't you go to Silicon Valley or whatever?
One, because I'm like an East Coast guy, so like I'm sort of more predisposed to New York. I'd already had a large group of friends. Obviously, like the Florida to New York pipeline is like very, very strong. And I just wanted to live in New York forever, having been in the Northeast and all of that kind of stuff. In retrospect, I'm glad that I did because I really truthfully believe at that point in time, New York had a little bit of a deeper claw in terms of how deeply integrated it was with the New York firms. It doesn't matter where the growth was happening faster. I think it was equal. And of course, pure tech being kind of like better in Silicon Valley. But New York had this nice intersection of former people who working in law firms, still in New York, trying to start companies, people who were innovation people surrounding this whole thing. And there was people getting funding even in those early-ish years. 10 years ago, the funding wasn't even close to what we're seeing now in New York. So there was a lot. It wasn't Silicon Valley seeded Series A sort of like levels, but things were still sort of like happening there.
Going back to the epiphany you had at the law firm and the law firm's indifference to it, was it because like, it's another tool I got to learn. I'm just not tech savvy, or I don't care, versus, well, you just did in 6 hours what I could have billed 20 for. Like, what was it that you think caused their disinterest?
To me, it was just to ground it in the culture and the practice of the firm. This was a boutique maritime law transaction and litigation practice that had an arm of basically IP that was sort of like attached to it. And effectively, the bread and butter of this practice, which was just deep industry expertise, deep niche practices, good clients that came for us over and over again to basically handle either their product liability cases, their slip and fall cases, their personal injury cases, their breach of contract cases, their all the rest of it, and then sort of like their buyouts, their asset purchases, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I just kind of feel like within that, that was what mattered at the top end. That's what they were most conscious about. It's like at the end of the day, the clients are still going to come in. It's like around the idea of optimization. And in this case, it was only because we were also handling large cases, I remember. And it was just a matter of like efficiency at that point in time. But there wasn't an identity at all around the idea of technology as it relates to good, very well-known maritime practice within the context of 2015 Florida and how that practice sort of worked.
Right. So going back to your move to New York, you ultimately throw out a shingle because you got to pay your bills. But was the goal on the move to New York always, I'm going to get into legal tech, and the shingle thing was just sustenance?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. It's funny. I was doing a podcast with somebody yesterday, Sarah Cottrell, and she does the former lawyer.
Plug your podcast.
So podcast is This Legal Life, and basically This Legal Life interviews people about their legal life stories, hopefully with the idea of we're all going through this, trying to sort of figure out where's our best place and trying to find like our place. And today, I think that there's so many paths within legal that you can kind of find. And what I'm trying to do is just get everybody's story so that people who are listening to it who are thinking of what else can I do in here, just kind of get a grounding. So I'm doing this podcast, but I'm actually on her podcast, and it's a podcast, as you can tell, The Former Lawyer. It's a podcast about people who used to be lawyers and then transition into something else. And I'm going through and I'm sort of telling my story to her. The original plan, that my little very well thought out plan, 31 years old, all I had ever done was like be an associate at a law firm. My very well thought out plan is, okay, here's how it's going to go. I'm going to be so strategic. So I'm going to get to New York, right? I'm going to network, and I'm also going to open up a firm being like an outside general counsel for legal tech companies. Then those legal tech companies, I'm going to like get in and kind of like transition from outside GC to maybe like a COO, and then like COO, I'm going to like move in and like maybe I'll like just find my way there in that sort of operational sort of thing. So that's the Trojan horse wedge plan. I mean, basically, I move up to New York with like $50,000, which is like my entire savings from working. I was having like a pretty good time living in Miami, making a good income, but having a good time. So I move up there, and 50K, that's like a year.
In New York, it's like 3 days.
So I get in, boom, 3 months go by. I'm just kind of like networking with people, right? Boom, 3 months go by. I'm like trying to put together what's the even offering of an outside general counsel offering. What does that even look like? Okay, so we're 6 months in, I'm like 20,000 in the hole already. I basically, long story short is, yes, I get a couple of clients, but then it gets into the pricing and sort of like the packaging and sort of doing the work and all of that. And then I also sort of start to see, being realistic, the people who are engaging me, they're early stage startups, effectively. And like legal work, it's kind of like when we get around to it sort of thing.
Right. And it's also a luxury because they can't pay for it, right?
Exactly. And even if they do have some seed money, it's mostly the issues aren't that complicated at this point in time, right? So then that kind of dawns on me a little bit, I'm getting there. And then moreover, I just realize, and this is the point that I was getting to sort of like Sarah, what I realize is that it's such a big jump from general counsel to kind of being a growth contributor in what early stage companies want, which is they need people to either A, open up deals for them, or B, close those deals. And that's basically it. Everything is sort of like secondary because you need cash flow at that point in time, right? And the last is you need people who can kind of like validate the offer and get it going and obviously build the product and all of that stuff. But that's a back end sort of thing. So basically you need sales marketing people, you need people with deep networks, and you need people to build it, right? You need somebody to think about it. You need one person to build it, one person to sell it. That's what they're sort of looking for, and that's sort of the jump. And so very quickly, I start to about 6 months in, very quickly, I start to see, okay, I have to make this transition into sales, marketing, growth, product, something, and I need to spin up my skills very, very quickly to get to a point about what they're trying to do with sort of skill. So at this point in time is right when I start to sort of like make this transition and sort of do legal work, but also like sort of position myself as like a growth person within legal tech. Anyway, here's the point. At some point in time, that whole well-trodden plan around all of that kind of goes out the window. Fast forward another 6 months, I get my first job in legal tech. I'm down to my last rent check, literally in my savings. I'm gonna have to like go back to Florida, go sleep on somebody's couch, whatever it is. When a random flyer that I had given out to somebody at Legal Week. So this is like fast forward a year, Legal Week the year before. They call me up and they say, "Hey, we took a look. We remembered you. What you gave us a flyer."
What was the flyer?
The flyer was sort of about accelerating deals.
Oh, so growth.
Yeah, growth, right, exactly. And it was sort of still half general counsel, but it was sort of also half growth kind of. It was just talking about like sales flow and sales pipeline flow and this kind of stuff. And basically, I got my first job in sales, effectively in a legal tech company.
Was that Legal Sifter or no?
Yeah, it was Legal Sifter.
So that was just quick because I was going to ask you the question because that's another Pennsylvania company, and
Yes.
that was just complete coincidence.
That was just complete coincidence. As I get older in my life, sometimes I don't think that coincidences are coincidences. Yeah, so there's a Pennsylvania connection, and that was sort of part of it because I knew that I had gone to Widener.
And we should say, we explain what Legal Sifter is. I think now would call themselves a CLM, Contract Lifecycle Management Company. But back then it was more, they were ahead of the curve, was AI to edit contracts. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And also I had told my story about, the sort of e-discovery and AI and stuff, and sort of all of this sort of pieced together. And the fact that I was in New York was very attractive to them because, they could sort of have boots on the ground. So this all comes together and basically saves my skin, and
We need to do more with less. That is the key takeaway nowadays from almost every survey of in-house counsel. But what if it didn't have to be that way? What if you actually could do more for less? By combining legal expertise and technology, Percipient enables legal teams to get more work done for less. Buried in contracts and sales is frustrated with turnaround time? We can help with that. Did you just get hit with a subpoena and reviewing 100,000 documents and files will tax your resources or cost you a small fortune in billable hours? We can help there too. Our team of legal professionals leverage tech and project management principles with the right amount of human oversight to deliver precise, efficient, and cost-effective legal solutions. Whether it's legal operations and contract management support, subpoena compliance, or document review, Percipient is your partner in really doing more for less. Percipient. Legal services powered by technology.
keeps me in sort of the legal tech game.
You're there for a few years, and then you go to another company, but you end up at Nexl. What year is this?
I'm only in Legal Sifter for a year. So then after about a year, at that point in time, it's still an early stage company. I've gone from sales to sort of running marketing to standing up outbound marketing to doing sort of everything in between, and really have expanded my skills in terms of my growth skills, which is growth is kind of like at the intersection of sales, product, and marketing together, right? You're sort of like using marketing and sales and product to kind of like drive users, engagement, marketing, attraction, all of this kind of stuff, closing, revenue, all of that. So I've gotten my hands deep in all of that, trial by fire. And then Phil, who's the founder of Nexl, comes to me and says, I'm going to do this thing. I want you to join. Come join the founding team. And, he pitched me on, we weren't even thinking about CRM. He pitched me on a productivity tool to help basically facilitate cross-border referrals.
For lawyers, referrals for lawyers.
Referrals for lawyers. So the North Star is absolutely still there, which is a platform to basically help lawyers with business development. But we go so niche into like cross-border referrals because he had facilitated that earlier in his career. And we thought that there was a signal there. And having done cross-border work myself previously in this practice, sending stuff abroad, I'm like 100%, let's do a productivity thing.
What year does he approach you?
Now this is 2019. Phil started it in October of 2018 and I'm joining in 2019.
Explain what it is now. Explain what the app is now.
Today, we are a legal CRM, and I think everybody knows what a legal CRM is. If you don't, it's a client relationship management platform, which is really a fancy way of saying we're trying to basically help lawyers understand their relationships at a deep, deep level by knowing all of their interactions, who knows who, what emails they went to, what events they went to, where did they meet them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what we're doing today. At the time, that's not what we were thinking about, but we still had this idea of lawyer business development as being kind of like a huge lever today. And then we were trying to do it in a different way. We were trying to do a referral, so lawyer to lawyer. Eventually, we sort of like graduated out of that through a lot of pivots in near cases, but we eventually got there. And today, Nexl is a Series A, Series B company, 80 people, over 5 million in revenue.
It's more than just CRM at its heart now. You can send emails,
Totally
organize events, you can collaborate on work. So there's a lot of different apps that it can replace, which leads me to my question. I know you get it a lot. Why does legal need its own CRM? Why don't I just use HubSpot or Salesforce or what have you?
So we think of it in this way, which is HubSpot and Salesforce fundamentally is built still on the idea that it's built for salespeople who have sales managers who kind of use the CRM as not only the single source, but also use it as kind of there's mechanisms and meetings to get them to put data into the CRM and stay consistent with updating the CRM.
Which is a huge piece. I don't think people understand that. That's a huge piece is being disciplined to get that info in there. Because we're a HubSpot company and I'm always harping. You got to stay on it. You got to keep it clean.
Yes, totally. Now, that paradigm, that mechanism, those meetings, those managers, that incentive structure, all of that is completely foreign to law firms. There's none of that. In other words, there is zero incentives for anybody to put anything into a CRM, let alone collaborate with each other in terms of doing business development and all of that. So we saw this as a unique opportunity. And the reason that legal needs a CRM for itself is one, because those incentives aren't there, but two, because the technology that we have built basically makes it so that most of the information that lawyers would need to put in any other CRM is largely passively grabbed and also enriched, making it such that we can deliver rather than lawyers going into the CRM to get information and or even worse, put stuff in. Instead, the CRM is sort of giving them information.
And it's grabbing it from, your Outlook or other apps you're using. It's seeing who you're talking to. And
right, exactly. And it's enriching. It's enriching with third-party data. So it's doing these simultaneously things. And now with, of course, ChatGPT, it's generating sort of insights out to you. So that's the big thing, effectively, which is instead of lawyers going in to sort of keep things up, we're delivering a system that's giving them information, giving them what we call relationship intelligence out to them.
Okay, so you hit on ChatGPT, so we can't not talk about AI this day and age. But you posted something really interesting. And I actually was not going to bring up AI too much in my conversation with you, but then I saw this post and I liked it, and I wanted to talk to you about it. You say, true, AI will change legal. Also true, AI will not change legal. When it comes to legal, the fundamentals remain. AI will wash away everything else. And you say the question is, what is fundamental? So I pose that question to you. What is fundamental? What can't AI take away? Because you and I have talked about this at length, especially the last on your podcast. Is there's a lot in legal that it's pretty rote and not that bespoke, and that you don't need a legal degree to do and can be automated. But there's certain, the most important elements are not, those fundamentals. And what do you think they are?
So I just got back from a PT appointment, right? And I'm going to make an analogy here just to sort of like ground this because lots of people have gone to physical therapy, not as many have gone to lawyers, but my PT appointment, I'm trying to solve a back issue. Now, all of the stretches and the information and how I almost even self-diagnosed with my specific sort of thing. If anybody wants to know, I'm a huge advocate for this thing called posture restoration, where we're all out of alignment because we sit all day and our postures are all bad. Yeah, and you just set up exactly. So it's all of that. I found out all of that. I used YouTube. I used ChatGPT. I went on YouTube. I saw sort of started to test myself a little bit about whether or not this was going to be it. Okay, that's how I diagnosed sort of like my back issue. But let me be sort of crystal clear. I go into my PT. She is an expert in terms of one, not only forming a relationship with me and having sort of keeping me on a cadence for purposes of, are you doing it? I can tell you're not doing it. Why haven't you done it? You know what I mean? No, actually, whenever you lay down, you're still slumping over and creating sort of a concave curve in it. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, I think you can get it, is that there is something about the relationship between myself and the physical therapist that basically it has been crucial. Even though I can ask ChatGPT, oh, give me exercises and create a PT plan that goes from beginner to intermediate to hard and sort of take me along this path. But what it can't do is I can't have a relationship with it. It can't give me feedback. It can't keep me honest. And more than anything, it doesn't get me into sort of like the rhythm of this whole thing. So basically, that's a long way of saying that I don't want to be so sort of dead on here, but let me be dead on, which is yes, a lot. If you see how the sausage is made, like you and I have seen, and what millions of us have seen practice law throughout the ages, a lot of it has gotten to a point of templatation, and a lot of it has come to the roteness of it. And yet, at the end of the day, client is coming to you to not only have a grounding in terms of what's going on and make sense of the complications with regards to their particular matter, but also a client is also coming to you as a trusted advisor, as a smart person that's sort of sitting in their corner. And what I think is not only are the best lawyers going to use AI to deliver, yes, great work product, but also contextualize sort of the state of the legal world and even arguably maybe like the business for these clients and do it in a way that is highly personalized. So that I think is like sort of the fundamentals. And that gets back to basically what it was like to be like a lawyer.
Right, your counsel, right? You were a counselor, a trusted advisor.
Yes, exactly. We see these old movies, like walking down the cobble streets, to go see the client and like, the client better and you guys go to church together and whatever, you're like, whatever, that's the whole point. It's like getting back to that deep sort of level of sophistication, not whenever it comes to the practice of law, but whenever it comes to the application of law to a person's life.
I like that relationship because my classic example is always, well, one thing AI can never do is that great trial lawyer. They can't go and deliver some appeal to the jury that sways the jury. And as you said that, you put it in one word what that is. It's the relationship with the jury that the human has. You could put a robot up there that AI does basically says the same words to the jury. It's not going to work, right? This relationship thing is interesting because as you said that, I started thinking about this. Okay, so what I think AI changes and impacts is kind of the middle types of law. What I mean by that is, okay, so the relation, for instance, family law, domestic stuff, that's where you need a relationship, right? Could even be like smaller creditor stuff where someone wants to go tell their story. I couldn't pay my bill or I was late because of XYZ. AI can't automate that. It can automate all the paperwork, probably everything you need to do legally to go to court, but it can't automate that. And then on the other end, stepping out of consumer, the high end corporate legal work where you need strategy, right? And the trusted advisor, like, okay, we could file this motion or we could sue this company or we could take this deal. What do you think? And then the lawyer can weigh in, right? It's not going to take that away.
The other side of this is just to extend this just a little bit. So, what's fundamental is the relationship. And I see this up and sort of down the stack. So then what sort of changes? And I've been thinking about this and I want to test it with you a little bit and see what you think. It's like, I'm going to make the claim that basically AI is not about the technology. At the end of the day, AI is largely about the jobs and the roles that it's going to be created. Yes, I get it. It's very interesting that I can ask the AI let's take it out of legal for a second. I take a shot of my pantry and it builds a dinner for me. That's really cool. But ultimately, what's really interesting is within the context of the law firm, what are the jobs that are going to come out of it that basically is facilitated with this kind of like capacity and technology? And truthfully, I think when we look back 40 years from now, it will not be that there was a better drafted motion or even the something like the processual sort of like augmentation that led to maybe deeper or better or quicker service and work product. I think it's going to be, where did these jobs come from? Where did these roles come from? Where did the output come from that law firms are sort of like creating, and it's this world of like legal adjacent, legal plus, and what that sort of looks like. And that I think is actually really interesting because I think, I'm really interested in terms of like legal careers, the development of the careers. And I think that that's going to be its legacy in a way.
What are the jobs that are going to be created by AI? That is interesting. But kind of flipping the script a little bit, what's some tech that's not AI related that you think is going to have an impact on the legal world?
First of all, data. I think data is very interesting, and data as kind of the aggregation and the manipulation and the characterization of data as it relates to sort of like all the interactions. It's underappreciated today within legal. It's not necessarily a technology, except if you think of like data and sort of the aggregation of data and the manipulation of data across analytics, across intelligence as kind of being like the very interesting technology. Let me push it out. Just one side question. Let me push it out of what we think of, because we modern people, when we say technology, we think of a very specific thing, right? We think of hard, typically today, computer science sort of driven technology. I would say that emotional intelligence is basically a type of technology because it's sort of like an input that you can put into yourself, just so long as you're willing and able. But I think it's kind of like a technology that people don't sort of like think about naturally. In other spheres of my life, I hang out with people who call these things like psychotechnologies. They're ways to kind of like get yourself to see things a little bit differently. And it's a little outside the bound.
Yeah. So yeah, that's interesting that you equated to a tech. That was not the answer I was expecting, but that is very interesting. Another thing that's goes hand in hand in all this. This is another post you had talking about the next few years of how legal is going to change. And you get to, I think it's year 2030. You say ownership laws are challenged and changed, somewhat shockingly by law firms themselves. Now, I don't know if I'm buying that part, but we'll keep going. Not quote unquote non-lawyers, i.e. ops, tech, data, marketing, AI experts now get equity in law firms or company or whatever. Legal plus business units emerge, structured around business workflows, not lawyer, non-lawyer hierarchies. Okay, so I agree on that. I'm hopeful it's by 2030. I just struggle with the rules of professional conduct and this whole ownership of legal entities, i.e. law firms, prohibited if you're not a lawyer. What's it going to take to change that? What's it going to change to make that reality happen you just described?
I really don't know the how because things are so murky right now. We're like in a time between, people love this term, like we're in a time between worlds. We're in a time between stories. We know like what's sort of like ending, even if it's flailing around, still trying to keep its relevance. I think a lot of people feel the writing on the wall, but what's coming is like still not really that sort of wrought together. And more importantly, because I'm so predisposed to stories, because I think human beings just think in stories, it needs to come together into a cohesive story. Anyway, the point is, so I don't really know the how. I think it'll be a story that sort of brings all of this together. Let me pick up on one thing. The reason that I said law firms specifically might be the push, and nobody buys it.
I don't care what you're about to say. I will bet you $100 right now.
Because I think it changes quick if the law firms, obviously, you and I can agree, if the law firms want to overdo it, they'll do it. It gets overturned very, very quickly. The 2030 thing is based principally on that thing that law firms basically drive the change. And why do I say that? It's because I think something about the market demand starts to slip away from them. Somehow, some way, it starts to get lost a little in the gray areas. Now, I don't think that they'll push back, but basically, I see things like, you push me against a wall, here's what I think. Very smart people put together law firm in name only, but tech company and operations, and they go after market share, right? And they really start to take a lot of market share in a very, very specific way. And there's this law firm that basically is coming out and saying like straight up, like, we're a tech company that just happens to have lawyers in the loop. But our value proposition is this is a tech forward, but truly tech forward, and we're raising outside capital based on this. Now, I haven't looked in, I'm sure, however, they're being licensed and all that. But basically, that's my whole big point. My whole big point is like something happens. And I know that we've seen this with Axiom, and I know that we've seen this with, all of these ways. I know, I can't remember, Justin Kahn sort of did the whole thing out in Silicon Valley. You remember that didn't work. Blah, blah, blah. I just think that like, the reality is that Axiom didn't have ChatGPT, didn't have generative AI across those models with prices going sort of down in terms of running these models. Neither did Justin Kahn, you know what I mean? Those are still hard to put together businesses that were still sort of, in a way, operating at scale. You know what I mean? Like, I think that Justin Kahn, it was like it went to like 500 people in like 2 years or something like that, and that's like a large cost basis. I just don't see that. That's my whole bet. Somebody is going to nail it. Somebody's going to understand how to do it. It starts to eat into market share in a very significant way. And somehow, some way, 5 years from now, lawyers feel backed into a corner. And then this is my crazy take, they're the ones who say, F it. You know what I mean? We have to change the whole structure, and we need to attract people. Maybe we need to attract people. And the only way, there's no way in hell that the best engineers in the world are going to come work at a law firm unless they have tremendous upside.
So maybe our thinking's not so far off, but here's what I think the catalyst is going to be. I think there's going to be companies out there, may involve lawyers, may not. They're going to pull the Uber model, and not the Uber model you think of, you use your own car. The Uber model is we're going to build something, F it, we're going to ask for forgiveness later. Like, we're going to go into these towns, make taxi companies, not call it taxi, and we're just going to let the regulators come at us and we're going to beat them. I think that might happen in law.
I can see all of these things, like you and I agree. There's this concept that's really cool in physics called the attractor point, and it's nobody can read it, obviously what's going to happen, but the attractor point is like the most probable thing based on the most emergent vector that's going to happen based on the forces of the lower level. Physics kind of works. Why did it go from like electromagnetic things to chemistry to biology to culture? Because that's the attractor point. These things build on top of it. And so it didn't have to happen that biological life happened, but it's sort of like the way that the path of least resistance, and it makes the most sense, especially carbon life forms. Anyway, the point is, it's like, I feel like the attractor point is this idea of, you say the Uber people beg for forgiveness later. I sort of see, we just call it a law firm and then we just don't run it at all as a law firm, and that's it, and that sort of whole thing. And do people want human in the loop? Yeah, sort of. I don't know. It's like, it's kind of going to be okay.
That's what's going to change too for a lot of stuff. They're going to realize maybe we don't need the human. This non-relationship stuff like we talked about, they're probably going to realize maybe we just really don't need a human. I just need this form filled out, give it to whatever governing body you need to give it to, and it solves the problem, right?
Something like this. I've always thought the idea of malpractice looms so heavy over the legal profession and which drives them to this over indexing toward risk, and I just like, I sort of see like maybe that like letting up a little bit. I know that the models aren't perfect. Everybody gets that.
Humans aren't perfect.
Exactly. But that's the other part of it. You know what I mean? Like, the malpractice has been around forever. That doesn't mean lawyers are putting out a perfect work product. No, like,
Yeah.
I know. Let's be realistic. I was a 29-year-old person trying to do my best, learning on the fly and putting stuff out. If like, let's put all the cards out on the table, So you have humans hallucinating, you have AI hallucinating. And I just think that gray area, and then you have sort of like the willingness to pay and people, and kind of like what the product feels like and how quickly they're getting it back, and the overall feeling of dealing with the work product and stuff. And I just think that whole risk tolerance changes fundamentally.
I agree. Ben, it's been awesome. Great time. Good convo. Appreciate your time. If people want to get a hold of you, where do you want to send them?
You can email me, ben@nexl.io. I'd love to talk about this stuff. Like truthfully, I live and breathe this industry because in some sense I see as legal, so in life, yeah, we're in a time between worlds in like legal, but we're also in a time between worlds, arguably in the world, as well. The things that happen here, sort of like a weird reflection. And, the two things is obviously technology, which I love to see the application, but more than anything, like what's going to happen on the other side of this. And that's why it's sort of the idea of relationships, the idea of like new rules. I mean, that's so interesting. So if that's like your jam, I'd love to talk to you. And if you're in the legal industry and like want to rap about that, I would love to hear your story on my podcast. So that's one. And then if you don't email me and you can't find me, just hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm the only person with my name on LinkedIn.
Actually, you should probably spell it.
Here we go. Ben Chiriboga, Chiriboga. And it's a Basque last name from Spain that means tiny bar.
As in drink bar or bar like the object bar?
Yeah, as a drink bar.
Oh, I love it. I'm going to steal that. I like that. I like that name. All right, cool, man. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, you too. Always good talking with you, man.
Okay, that's a wrap for today's episode. As always, we really appreciate you listening. If you want to subscribe, you can find us on most major podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, etc. Also, if you like us enough, I hope you leave us a favorable review. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, this has been Technically Legal.